A man from the stars fell into my world, Elon Musk. He came seeking answers. But what he found were lessons he never expected. For 5 days, I will take him on a journey of discovery. He will struggle, he will question, and only at the end will I reveal the lesson.
The hum of the command deck was the only sound accompanying me as I gazed into the infinite abyss of space. Seated within SpaceX's most advanced interstellar research vessel, I marveled at the silent majesty of the cosmos. This was the frontier, uncharted, boundless, and exhilarating. I was in the midst of testing a revolutionary propulsion system, a leap forward in deep space travel, when the ship's sensors flared an ominous red. A rift had opened before me. A swirling, luminous vortex expanded against the black canvas of space, its edges rippling like disturbed water. Alarms blared as gravitational forces seized my vessel. Before I could even attempt an evasive maneuver, an unseen force yanked me forward, spiraling into the unknown. The ship trembled violently. The universe around me twisted, distorted. Then everything went dark. When I awoke, I wasn't in my ship. I wasn't in space. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and burning wood, a stark contrast to the sterile, metallic atmosphere of my spacecraft. As I pushed myself upright, my surroundings came into focus. The sky above, so impossibly clear, speckled with stars undimmed by pollution, was unlike anything I had ever seen. The world around me felt old, ancient, yet alive with an energy I couldn't explain. Then, movement. A man emerged from the shadows, his posture composed, yet brimming with unspoken intensity. His coat, tailored in the fashion of the 18th century, rustled in the cool night breeze. His gaze, sharp and probing, held the weight of an intellect that could unravel the very fabric of reality. He studied me, not with fear, but with the fascination of a scientist encountering an anomaly in his grand equation. "You have come from the future," he said, his voice measured and calm. "The stars have brought you here for a reason. Will you walk with me?" My breath caught. I knew that face, that voice, that unmistakable presence. "Isaac Newton," I whispered. The sheer impossibility of it sent a jolt through me. I had somehow traveled across centuries, drawn into the very era of one of history's greatest minds. My heart pounded as Newton extended his hand, his expression one of both curiosity and expectation. And then, without hesitation, I took it. The past had become my present, and the adventure of a lifetime had just begun. Newton guided me through the cobbled streets of Cambridge, the scent of damp stone and burning lantern oil thick in the night air. The city, untouched by modern industry, was a living relic, quiet yet brimming with intellectual energy. We walked in silence until we reached an imposing wooden tower, its beams stretching skyward like the ribs of some forgotten colossus. The structure was unlike anything I had expected, meticulously crafted, its levels measured with the precision of a man obsessed with the unseen forces that governed the world. Newton placed a hand on the wooden frame, his expression unreadable. "This tower," he said, his voice laced with quiet authority, "is a tool, a gateway to understanding." Then, without another word, he grasped the ladder's rungs and began his ascent. I hesitated. This was a man whose mind had revolutionized physics, who had seen deeper into the mechanics of the universe than anyone before him. If he thought this climb was important, I wasn't about to argue. I followed, my modern shoes slipping slightly against the well-worn wood. The night air grew thinner as we climbed, the city shrinking below us, its glow swallowed by the vast canopy of stars. When we reached the summit, Newton reached into a wooden crate and produced a heavy iron sphere, its surface cold against my palm. "Drop it," he instructed, stepping aside. I stared at the ball, then at him. "You want me to?" He simply nodded. Taking a breath, I let go. The sphere fell, slicing through the air with an eerie finality. The impact was thunderous. Stone shattered, as if struck by a cannonball. Dust and debris scattered below, the force undeniable. I frowned, rubbing my hands together. I know gravity works, but why did we do this? Newton turned to me, a knowing smile playing at his lips. His eyes gleamed, not with amusement, but with something deeper, something more profound. Because, he said cryptically, understanding a force is one thing, controlling it is another. Then, without another word, he motioned for us to descend. The night was far from over. Our journey led us to the edge of a wide, untamed river, its waters swirling in furious eddies, crashing violently against jagged rocks. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mist, the current roaring like an unrelenting beast. This was no mere stream. It was a force of nature, wild and indifferent to those who dared to challenge it. Newton came to a halt, his gaze fixed on the churning waters. Then, without hesitation, he turned to me and handed over a simple wooden raft and a long pole. "You must cross it," he declared, his voice calm, unwavering. I hesitated, glancing between the unstable raft and the river that seemed to hunger for anything foolish enough to enter its grasp. But Newton simply watched, waiting. Steeling myself, I stepped onto the raft and pushed off. Instantly, the current seized me, dragging me downstream with terrifying speed. I dug the pole into the riverbed, straining to fight against the pull. My muscles burned, my grip tightened. But the more I resisted, the more I was thrown off course. The river was relentless, twisting and turning, threatening to upend me with every surge. Panic set in. My mind screamed for control, for stability, but the water had no intention of granting me either. Then, something clicked. Instead of fighting, I adjusted my angle, moving with the current rather than against it. The moment I stopped resisting, the chaos transformed into something almost predictable. The river was still powerful, but now I could read its patterns. I shifted my weight, steering through the torrents, guiding the raft instead of struggling against forces I could not change. Little by little, I maneuvered towards the opposite shore. The moment my feet touched solid ground, exhaustion overtook me. I collapsed onto the damp bank, gasping for air, my limbs trembling from exertion. Newton stood nearby, observing in silence. He did not offer an explanation. No lecture, no congratulations. Just a small, knowing nod before turning and continuing forward. I lay there for a moment, drenched and breathless, watching him disappear into the fog, and then I understood. This was never about the river. As night descended, the air grew crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Newton led me through the rolling hills, our path illuminated only by the faint glow of the stars overhead. Eventually, we arrived at the entrance of a hidden cavern, its mouth shrouded in darkness. Without hesitation, Newton stepped inside, his silhouette vanishing into the shadows. I followed. The cavern was silent, save for the distant echo of dripping water. At its center, a single candle flickered, its fragile flame casting shifting shadows against the rough stone walls. The glow danced, stretching and twisting like living phantoms in the dim enclosure. Newton knelt before the flame, adjusting a large polished mirror before it. Instantly, the candle's light rebounded, casting a perfect reflection onto the far wall. Bright, clear, and seemingly tangible. Then, Newton turned to me. "Touch the light," he said. I hesitated, then extended my hand toward the illuminated patch on the wall. My fingers reached out, but met only cold, unyielding stone. The light, so vivid and real, was nothing but a projection, a trick of reflection, an illusion. I frowned, glancing at Newton. "This is just a projection." His expression remained unreadable. "Is it?" Something in his voice made me pause. It was not a question, not entirely. It was a challenge, a riddle left unanswered. I turned back to the glowing patch of light, my mind racing. The candle flickered, the reflection shifting, distorting, reforming. The truth was both simple and elusive. The light existed, and yet it did not. Before I could formulate a response, Newton stood, the experiment complete. Without another word, he stepped deeper into the cavern, his figure disappearing into the shadows once more. I followed, but now I was seeing the world differently. By dawn, we stood at the base of a towering mountain, its jagged peak lost within the clouds. It loomed over us like an unspoken challenge, a silent force of nature waiting to be conquered. The very sight of it filled me with both awe and unease. Newton stopped, gazing up at the summit before turning to me. His expression was calm, unreadable. "Climate." I let out a weary sigh, shaking my head. "I figured you'd say that." With no further instructions, I placed my hands on the cold, rough stone and began my ascent. Gravity made itself known with every step. My muscles burned. My breath came in short gasps. The thinning air made even the simplest movements feel like battles. Each foothold was a test of endurance. Each handhold, a moment of faith. The rocks, sharp and unforgiving, scraped against my palms, but I pushed forward, driven by sheer willpower. There were moments I thought of stopping, when exhaustion clawed at my limbs, when the mountain seemed infinite. But something within me refused to surrender. The higher I climbed, the clearer my mind became. The struggle was not just against the mountain, but against myself. After what felt like an eternity, I pulled myself over the final ledge, collapsing onto the summit. My chest heaved as I gasped for air, my body trembling from exhaustion. Then I looked back. The world stretched out beneath me, vast and endless. The treacherous path I had taken now seemed distant, almost insignificant. The pain, the exhaustion, all of it had faded in the face of the view before me. I had conquered the climb, and in the process, I had become stronger. A quiet movement behind me made me turn. Newton stood there, having arrived effortlessly, as if the mountain had offered him no resistance at all. He watched me with that same knowing expression. His eyes filled with something that felt like both amusement and expectation. But, as always, he said nothing, and yet, in his silence, I understood everything. That evening, as the fire crackled between us, the chill of the mountain air settled around our weary bodies. The sky stretched infinitely above, a vast celestial canvas littered with brilliant stars. Newton sat in silence for a long while before finally raising a hand, pointing toward a particularly radiant star high in the heavens. "That," he said, his voice calm and absolute, "is going to fall." I followed his gaze, watching the distant speck of light. Skepticism flickered through me. How could he possibly know? But before I could voice my doubt, the star moved. A meteor tore through the sky, streaking downward in a fiery descent. It blazed against the darkness, burning bright for a fleeting moment, before vanishing beyond the horizon. Silence followed. The universe carried on, indifferent, untouched by our astonishment. Newton turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Do you understand?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, I found myself staring at the empty space where the meteor had once been, the remnants of its journey imprinted in my mind. The question lingered, not just in the air, but deep within me. I had witnessed something extraordinary, and yet I knew the true lesson had only just begun. As dawn painted the sky with soft hues of gold and violet, Newton finally spoke. His voice, steady and measured, carried the weight of centuries. "The tower of gravity," he began, "taught you that forces act upon us all, whether we acknowledge them or not. Power without understanding can break anything beneath it." I thought back to the iron sphere, the shattered stone, how force, uncontrolled, could destroy rather than build. "The river of motion," he continued, "demonstrated that resistance is often futile. If you work against the current of life, you exhaust yourself. Move with it, and you will reach your destination. I recalled the struggle against the river's pull, the moment I surrendered to its flow, and the clarity that followed. The cave of reflection, Newton explained, showed that perception is not always reality. What you see is not always what is. The flickering candle, the illusion of light on cold stone, the realization that the world is not always as it appears. The mountain of resistance, he said, revealed that struggle strengthens. You fought against gravity, but in doing so, you grew stronger. The climb had tested my limits, but standing atop that peak, I had seen the truth in his words. The falling star, he concluded, reminded us that nothing lasts forever. Even the brightest lights in the sky must one day fade. I remembered the meteor's fleeting brilliance, how its fire had burned bright before vanishing into the void. Nothing, no force, no mind, no empire, could escape the passage of time. I stood in silence, humbled. The physics of the universe, once mere equations and laws, now carried meaning beyond calculation. They were not just forces to manipulate. They were lessons. I turned to Newton, my voice quiet, filled with newfound understanding. Thank you, Sir Isaac.